I'm 33 years old and got pregnant by my son's 16-year-old friend. As a single mother to Vincent, a 16-year-old teenager, I always prided myself on keeping our home in order and his life on track. Every day was a battle between exhausting work and the responsibility of being everything for my son. But at some point, the meticulous routine I had built to protect us began to suffocate. Life became colorless, devoid of hope. It was in that emptiness that Tyler entered, a 19-year-old, Vincent's best friend, and the beginning of my greatest mistake. He started coming to our house more often, and soon I realized it wasn't just his friendship with my son that brought him around. Tyler had a magnetic presence that I couldn't ignore. Casual visits turned into encounters filled with a tension I had never felt before, a dangerous spark I should have quelled. Instead, I let it grow, leading me down a path I knew was a trap. What began as a fleeting sensation soon became something impossible to control. I, who had always been the dedicated and responsible mother, was on the brink of a free fall. I tried to ignore it, rationalizing what I felt. Tyler was a boy full of life, with that freedom that only youth possesses. He would show up unannounced, always with an easy smile, and soon filled the house with laughter and casual conversations with Vincent. I hid in daily tasks, cleaning the kitchen or organizing papers in the office, pretending that his presence didn't affect me. But my eyes followed him without my realizing, capturing every gesture, every glance he threw my way. The truth is that, over time, he began to look at me differently. It wasn't the expression of a boy, but of a man who knew what he wanted. The way he sat on the sofa, his legs relaxed, arms stretched out, the confidence he exuded. All of it began to disturb me. I felt my heart race when he was near. I tried to convince myself it was just loneliness, that the weight of solitude was leading me to confuse things. After all, I had been alone for so long. But no matter how much I tried to push those thoughts away, Tyler seemed intent on being more present. He came over for dinner with Vincent, but after my son went to his room, Tyler always found an excuse to stay a little longer. "You work so hard, Edith. It mustn't be easy," he would comment with a gentle smile while helping me clear the table. Our eyes would meet for a second longer than they should, and in that moment, the silence spoke more than any words. And then, the longer conversations began. When Vincent was busy in his room or playing with friends, Tyler and I would end up in the living room, having coffee that lasted for hours. He was curious, wanting to know about my life, my dreams, the things I had set aside since becoming a mother. "You deserve more," he told me once, and his words echoed in my mind as a truth I tried to avoid. I could no longer ignore the obvious. There was a spark between us that grew with each encounter. It was one of those nights when the thin line between right and wrong broke. We were in the living room, alone. Vincent had already gone upstairs to sleep, and the silence in the house was almost palpable. Tyler leaned closer to me on the sofa, his presence so near that my whole body tensed. I knew I should get up, make an excuse, and end it before it was too late. But when he placed his hand over mine, I felt as if the whole world stopped. It was a light touch, but it felt like an electric current passing through me. I looked at him and saw the same desire reflected in his eyes. That's when I realized how deep I was in this situation. There was no turning back. The abyss lay before me, and I had already taken the first step. After that night, everything changed. Every time Tyler came to our house, the tension between us grew stronger. No one knew what was happening, and the truth was that I couldn't fully understand it myself. My heart raced every time I heard the doorbell, and I caught myself fixing my hair or choosing the right outfit to look casual without drawing too much attention. It was ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. Vincent, oblivious to what was going on, continued to treat Tyler as the ever-present friend. They laughed together, planned for the future, and my son trusted him blindly. This only increased my guilt. How could I betray my own son's trust? But at the same time, Tyler became the center of my world, in a way I couldn't control. All the monotony that suffocated me disappeared when he was around. It was on a Friday night that everything crumbled even more. Vincent had gone out with friends to a party, and Tyler showed up right after he left. He walked through the door under the pretense of returning a book, but the way he looked at me made it clear he wanted more. I tried to resist, tried to keep things within acceptable limits, but as soon as he crossed the room, everything fell apart again. When he pulled me in for a kiss, reason completely dissolved. I knew it was wrong, but the adrenaline of breaking the rules, of experiencing something I shouldn't, overwhelmed me. The kiss was long, intense, and when we finally separated, the silence felt too heavy to break. He looked at me as if he already knew what would come next, and I felt my heart sink. How could I face Vincent after this? What would I say if he suspected anything? The guilt crushed me, but the desire was stronger. Tyler, with that confident demeanor, didn't seem shaken by the situation. On the contrary, he pulled me in again, as if the consequences didn't exist. And for a moment, I believed him. That was the beginning of something deeper and more dangerous. In the weeks that followed, our situation grew like an uncontrollable fire. Whenever Vincent left the house, Tyler would show up. It was always in secret, always at moments when I knew no one would see us. Sometimes we would just spend hours talking, sharing confidences and impossible dreams. Other times, we would let ourselves be consumed by a desire that seemed to engulf everything around us. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time, and at the same time, I knew I was ruining everything. But guilt was a shadow I couldn't shake off. I knew I was betraying my son in a way he would never understand. At night, in the silence of my room, I would think about how Vincent would react if he found out that his best friend was in my bed. How could he ever forgive me for this? I felt that the relationship we had built over so many years was about to be destroyed, but I couldn't stop. Then a new bombshell dropped. It was on a regular morning, while I was getting ready for work, that I started to feel something different. A nausea, a slight dizziness, and a fear I knew all too well. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it was just fatigue. But something in my body was telling me the truth before I was even ready to accept it. I took a pregnancy test in the bathroom with trembling hands and a racing heart. And then 2 lines, clear as day. I was pregnant. Panic washed over me. How could this be happening? I had been through this before, but this time, the situation was completely different. The father of the baby was a 19-year-old, my son's best friend. And worst of all, I knew that this pregnancy would mean the end of the relationship between Vincent and Tyler. Perhaps the end of my relationship with Vincent. How could I tell him? With the news of the pregnancy, what was already complicated became even more impossible. Every time I looked at Vincent, I felt a knot tighten in my throat. How can a mother destroy her own son's life like this? The weight of guilt was crushing me, but I had no way to escape reality. The days following the discovery of the pregnancy were a true nightmare. Every time I looked in the mirror, reality seemed even crueler. I felt a mix of despair and fear growing inside me, but on the outside, I forced myself to keep up appearances. In front of Vincent, I tried to act as if nothing had changed, as if everything was normal. But with every exchanged word, every glance, I felt the ground about to collapse beneath me. Tyler also didn't know how to handle the situation. When I told him, I saw the shock in his eyes. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice low. He was clearly torn between youth and responsibility. Traveling the world, studying, living. All of that was in his plans, and now life was throwing us a challenge that could change everything. But the worst part was the silence between us. What had once been a passionate and secret relationship was now wrapped in guilt, doubt, and above all, fear. "We will figure this out," he told me one night while we were alone in the living room. But the truth was that neither of us had any idea how to resolve it. How to hide a pregnancy. How to explain all of this to Vincent without completely destroying him. And that was when Vincent began to notice that something was wrong. He wasn't stupid. Tyler's absences began to become noticeable, and the tension at home was palpable. My forced smiles and flimsy excuses started to make him suspicious. One day, while we were having dinner, he put down his utensils on the table with a firm look. "Mom, what's going on between you and Tyler?" he asked directly. I felt my heart freeze. Vincent's gaze, always so sweet, was now piercing, as if he were trying to read my soul. For a second, I thought about telling him everything. I thought about confessing the truth all at once and ending that agony. But the words wouldn't come out. I couldn't do it. I just looked at him and lied. "Nothing, dear. Everything's fine." He didn't believe me. I knew this by the way his eyes narrowed, as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle. After that dinner, he started to pull away. He no longer confronted me, but his presence in the house became distant, cold. I knew he sensed that something was wrong, but I just couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. How could I explain to him that his own mother was expecting a child from his best friend? The pressure began to consume me. The guilt of hiding such a big secret, of lying to my own son, was unbearable, and worst of all, Tyler started to disappear. Maybe it was the weight of responsibility or the fear of losing the freedom he valued so much, but he began to distance himself. The messages dwindled, the visits became rarer. I found myself feeling increasingly alone, trying to hold together the chaos I had created. Then one night, something happened. Vincent, who usually spent hours locked in his room or out with friends, was home, sitting on the couch when I entered the living room. He seemed to be waiting for me. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice serious. My heart raced, sensing that moment was coming. He didn't look away from my eyes, and I knew I couldn't escape this time. "I don't know what's going on, but I know you're hiding something. I see how different you are, how strange Tyler is. I just want the truth," he pleaded, and his voice sounded like a small, vulnerable, broken boy. The weight of the situation finally crumbled over me. Everything I feared, all my lies, were about to come to light. I stared at him for a few seconds, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Part of me still wanted to hide the truth, to escape that conversation at any cost. But Vincent was my son, and I knew that if I continued to lie, I would completely lose his trust. I took a deep breath, feeling the ground vanish beneath my feet. There was no turning back. "Vincent, I need to tell you something very serious," I began, feeling the words stuck in my throat. He stared at me, waiting, and I knew that in moments his world would come crashing down. I felt like the world was crumbling around me. There was Vincent, looking at me with his wide eyes, waiting for the truth. My mouth was dry and the words felt trapped in my throat. How could I tell him that his best friend, the one he trusted so much, would be the father of his brother? Guilt and fear paralyzed me. I took a deep breath, ready to say what I had feared most, when suddenly we heard the sound of the front door opening. The noise echoed through the house, and for a second, all the tension froze in the air. I looked toward the door and saw Tyler's figure entering slowly, as if that moment had been predestined. His face was serious, somber, and I knew he also carried the weight of what was to come. Vincent frowned, confused by Tyler's presence. He looked from me to him, trying to understand what was happening. Tyler, without waiting another second, closed the door and took a few steps forward, his gaze crossing mine for a brief moment before settling on Vincent. "We need to talk," Tyler said, his voice deeper than usual. The tension in the room was palpable, almost unbearable. Vincent looked at him, visibly suspicious. "What's going on? Why are you here now?" he asked, trying to maintain control, but his voice was already trembling. It was then that Tyler dropped the bombshell without beating around the bush. "Vincent, I need to tell you something important. I can't hide it anymore." He paused, as if gathering courage, and then the words came out like a shot. I'm going to be a father. Your mother is pregnant, and the baby is mine." For a moment, silence filled the room. Vincent stood completely still, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at me, then at Tyler, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "What?" was all he could say, his voice low and filled with disbelief. It was as if he were trying to process something impossible, something that made no sense in his mind. "I know this is hard to accept, but it's the truth," Tyler continued, now more nervous. "Your mother and we got involved, and now she's pregnant with me." With each word from Tyler, it was as if I could see Vincent's world shattering, piece by piece. My son, the one I had dedicated my entire life to, was standing before me on the brink of collapse. Vincent remained silent for a few more seconds, his breathing heavy, as if he were trying to hold himself together. Then, suddenly, he exploded. "You must be kidding!" he shouted, jumping to his feet. His face was red, his eyes filled with fury. "This can't be happening. My own mother? My best friend? How could you do this to me?" Vincent's words echoed through the room, each one cutting into my heart like a knife. I tried to approach him, but he took a step back, raising his hand as if I were a stranger. Don't come near me, Mom. I don't want to hear anything more from you. I felt the ground collapse beneath my feet. The pain in Vincent's eyes was unbearable. I didn't want it to be this way, Vincent, I tried to say, my voice trembling, full of tears that threatened to fall. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Hurt? You destroyed everything, he shouted, his voice nearly cracking. How could you? How could you betray our family like this? I trusted both of you. And this is how you repay me? He looked at Tyler with a fierce anger. And you? I considered you like a brother. How did you have the courage to do this? Tyler remained silent, visibly affected, but he did not try to defend himself. He knew there were not enough words to justify what he had done. Vincent looked at him with a disdain he had never shown before. Get out of my house, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Now. Tyler hesitated, looking at me as if expecting some kind of support, but I was too devastated to do anything. So, with a defeated look, he turned and left, letting the door slam behind him. The sound reverberated through the room, along with all the crushing silence that remained between me and my son. Vincent was still standing, breathing deeply, trying to process what had just happened. I knew this was the hardest moment of my life, and also the most devastating moment of his. I wanted to approach him, hug him, tell him that everything would be okay, but I knew it would be pointless. That moment was beyond any words. He turned to me, his eyes filled with tears and a pain that seemed endless. I can't believe you did this to me, he said, his voice broken. I loved you, Mom. I trusted you. And now, I don't even know who you are. He turned his back and ran up the stairs, the sound of his bedroom door slamming echoing through the empty house. And there I stood, alone in the living room, staring into the void, as the consequences of my choices collapsed on me like an uncontrollable avalanche. The house was enveloped in a suffocating silence. After Vincent's explosion, the air felt heavy, laden with hurt, regret, and above all, an unbearable emptiness. His words echoed in my mind, each one hitting me like a cruel blow. I don't even know who you are anymore. I felt like the world had shattered into 1,000 pieces around me, and there was no way to put it back together again. I spent the night awake, listening to the sound of Vincent's footsteps moving around in his room. The early morning advanced, and I knew a decision was being made. When the sun began to peek through the window, I walked to his bedroom door, trying to find a way to talk, to resolve the unthinkable. My heart raced. I lightly touched the door, and before I could knock, it opened. Vincent was there, standing in front of the bed, his bags packed. My heart stopped. The shock of seeing him like this, determined to leave, hit me with full force. Vincent, I began, my voice low and hesitant. What are you doing? He didn't even look at me. He continued, tossing some clothes into the suitcase, as if each piece he packed was a part of our life he was leaving behind. I'm leaving, Mom. I can't stay here anymore. His words were sharp, laden with pain and repressed anger. My breath caught in my throat. Leaving? Where are you going? It was then that... Comment second part if you want to know what happens next, and subscribe to the channel to watch when it premieres.